So we just watched a really interesting assessment with Emma, and just got the opportunity to grab Jowsey and ask him a little bit about what he was doing and why he was doing certain things. Firstly, what was she here for? What did she come to see you for?
Emma's been suffering with low back pain. She's been gradually increasing the amount of CrossFit training she's been doing over the last few years, and she went through like a heavy strength training period, training 5-6 days a week, and she's got to the point where her back hurts. She can no longer do the lower body weights, and she's just been doing upper body training, and that's been going on for 3 months now. Okay. So
wow, so she's just been upper body training for 3 months. That's quite frustrating for her, I'd imagine.
Yeah, she's really frustrated. Just getting out of bed in the morning has been painful on the back.
Okay, so we saw you do lots of different things. Where did you start? What was the idea behind the start there?
Well, start place was, she told me what hurt, so it's like, well, let's test as close to what hurts as possible. So I decided to first check range to make sure that she's got an adequate range of motion for activities. So just tested isolated joint motions, and then put her into kind of the squats, which was the in-between exercise, because I know that bending forwards was the worst. So I thought, well, let's test the squat first, see what I can see globally there, and then finally progress towards that deadlift motion and took her onto the single legs.
Okay.
Balance work.
So you start with just a general range of motion test around that. Did you do every joint in the body, or we only saw in the video you doing the hips? Would you just focus around the hips because of the low back pain, or would you typically do the whole body?
It depends on the person's sport and need. She was saying that it was mainly low back pain, and that lower body exercise was doing it, and especially bending forwards. So I thought, well, hip function and articulation of the pelvis, hip
and I'd imagine
range.
if you didn't find anything there, you'd move on to somewhere else in the body and have a look.
Yeah.
So you assessed the hips, and you, as I understand, flexibility seemed to be okay. Where'd you go now? What was the next test? How did you identify a problem, or did you identify a problem with that?
So from flexibility, there was a couple of tightnesses, but on the whole, like when you look at her on a scale, she's a lot more flexible. So then it's like, well, let's take her into that, towards that kind of flexion motion, and just test it in the different environments. So she's actually okay at body weight on 2 feet. So I was like, well, let's see what happens when she goes onto one leg. So I tested the left leg, tested the right leg balance and deadlift, and the right leg instantly brought on the back pain, just to reinforce that it wasn't an accumulation of reps like a fatigue symptom. I went back to the left and the pain reduces, and then went back to the right and the pain heightens again. So then I knew it was a right leg.
So you're looking for the pain?
Yeah,
you're
always
looking. That brings the pain on to give you some clues, or what? Is that how you're thinking? Yeah,
because I want to know where the threshold is and what movement's doing it. Why, like, that's as specific as we can get. Absolutely. It's movement specific. So we need to train the body to deal with and have the ability to control that motion. Okay,
so you found out that she stands on one leg and she does some kind of deadlifty, bending forward motions, and the pain comes.
Yeah.
What's your process from there? Where are you moving on to now? Are you going to treatment now? Is that enough diagnosis? What's the process from there?
From there, it's then just, because I've seen the instability, then I was taking her into more dynamic motions like lunges to see how does that same instability happen on the balance is an element of the lunge. So the ability to control ground reaction force requires an element of balance and stability. So does she cope well with that, or is that a challenge? And that way, seeing whether she can control it or not control it, that then becomes either a further test, a confirmation, but also then starts to train the process of the body being able to deal with it, because this was too stressful for her, so I couldn't train her to do that because I was only bringing the symptoms on. So now I need to just regress the exercise, train the pelvic stability in another environment, or test it in another environment, and then I found that the lunge environment provided a good kind of sounding board.
Cool. So
to improve it.
You mentioned two things there. First, you mentioned instability.
Yeah.
And in the same sentence, you mentioned control.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming by going to one leg, you're reducing the amount of, you're increasing the stability demand of the body. So you're reducing the amount of stability the body has there. And then you talk about control.
Yeah.
And stability and control, they'll go hand in hand together. And so you're putting them into the lunge there to test that control with a little bit more stability. So what did you see in the lunge?
In the lunge, you could see the same thing with the pelvis. The pelvis was going through the motions that we want to. We were seeing anterior rotation, we were seeing frontal plane motion, but it was going through those motions, but there was no control. It was almost moving into the motion.
Can you define that? I mean, like, just for the guys at home who are looking at movement, and the coaches, or cycle coaches or CrossFit coaches looking at people moving. It's easy for you. You say sort of very nonchalantly, I just saw frontal plane motion, or I saw sagittal plane motion. What are you looking for? What is it when you watch someone lunge? What are your eyes doing? What are you thinking? What's the process you go through there?
So, I mean, we could see it you could also see it in the single leg squat as well. It's probably an easier environment for a lot of the guys will be quite familiar with a single leg squat and the Trendelenburg test. So as she squatted, she goes down and the hip slides out in the frontal plane there, but she also had a rotation. Well, that same glide in the frontal plane there could be seen in the lunge.
Okay.
So it's almost like it doesn't need that, like this being a really big challenge, the lunge also, the pelvis moves through those same motions.
So do you sort of superimpose what you perceive as a perfect movement on top of that person and then see if they come off center, for example? Is that how you're looking at someone? That's what I'm listening to, is that you see, well, in my head, that's the perfect lunge, and then as I'm seeing someone lunge, they're doing that or they're doing this. So that might be wrong. Or that might not be correct for that person.
Yeah.
So would you, and how do you know that's wrong? If you know what I'm saying, how do you know that's wrong? Rather than, is that because you've got so much experience of seeing people do it correctly, or what we perceive to be correctly, that it just looks wrong? Or do you compare them left to right? Do you compare themselves to themselves, or do you compare her to other people when you're watching them?
Combination of all those.
Okay.
So based on the principles that you taught me, understanding, well, when the foot hits the floor, what happens at the foot, how does that translate up the body, where should it go in space and time, and then the years of experience of going, well, I've now seen that lunge 10 million times, comparing her left and right and going, well, the left doesn't do it and the right is, every time she does the right, she slides and you can see that she's falling over, be it a hand twitch to control her, all these little kind of clues, nuances of movement, and that experience of this is someone that's got control, just that ability, like we say out in the seminars, see the wood for the trees. Like there's these specifics of here's what the hip's doing, but as soon as that person sets off on a lunge and we see this, it's like, well, they've given you a big subconscious cue there that, okay, I'm actually challenged by my ability to control this movement, which is why I'm creating tension through my whole body. And that was actually one of her initial cues, which is why I've taken the hands out of the game.
We're coming on to the lunge in a minute, so don't go too far. I'm going to ask you a little bit about the lunge in a minute. So what's your process now? So let's say we've identified, as I'm listening to you, you've got a right hip problem, you've got a lack of control, instability of the right hip. Pretty much in every motion she does, you see some form of compensatory motion within that hip, and you've identified that. What do you do now? Because I think that confuses a lot of people. Okay, I can see that that's wrong. Even just looking at a squat, I can see that that's not right. But the correction process is quite a tough process. It doesn't need to be. But so what was it? What we saw? What did you start with there? What did we see you doing on the box over there?
So that was kind of because the single leg squat was so twisted. I was using just changing the foot angle to kind of allow her to be able to position the pelvis in a more optimal, to position it in the position that I want it to train in, seeing can she hold that position, or does that allow me, if I place her in that position, does it help her, or does it hinder her, compensate somewhere else? Whereas what I found was I put her in there, I got exactly what I wanted from the exercise, saw better control in the pelvis. So rather than that test now became one of the exercises in the program. Okay.
And so there was like a micro loading process or something. How many sets, reps? What we're talking about? You just put her in the position and asked her to do it once. Of course, once and for success, let's say, like you say, it's successful, it's working well, everything's perfect. How many of them are you doing then?
So that micro load in there, within the program itself, basically what I saw was at the start of doing that movement, I was looking for, well, it looks great, and then after about 6 to 8 reps, she started to fatigue, and it all started to kick in again.
Okay,
so then I just visually stopping as soon as the form goes, and then the goal being that I want her to show me that she can hold that position for a longer period of time. So in the program, she starts at 6 reps, and her progression, I want her to be able to do that for 20 reps.
Okay, so where do you go now? We've got a position, we've got a load, we've got a micro load.
Yeah.
And we're actually teaching the body sort of neurologically to understand that right position. And you're satisfied, you're happy. It might not be today, but where do you go now? What's the next step? What we're going to try to do now? Where do you go with it? What do we see you do next?
So there it was blending into the lunges.
Okay.
So micro load in the hip there.
Yeah.
In the balance environment, which is where she struggled.
Yeah.
Taking it.
Micro load, balance.
Yeah. Into dynamic movement.
Like
a lunge with the impact through bigger ranges. So neurologically, the whole system can learn the control, to learn the movement together, and then from there put her back, always working back towards the thing that she failed at, which was the single leg.
And when you fail,
cause pain. So what we call, I always call it the holy grail, the thing that causes the pain, creates a symptom. That's our target. Like, we need that exercise, that movement to be pain free.